Hello, I'm Ashley Mueller, part of the Digital Amplification team with the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Welcome to our video on Towards Evidence-Based Arms Control and Disarmament, prepared for Geneva Peace Week by the GCSP, the Interparliamentary Union, and the Small Arms Survey. Our world is severely impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. In this context, emotions, fake news, and post-truth gained traction. This is why it is important for policymakers to resort to the best available evidence to make the right policy decisions. This also applies to the field of arms control and disarmament. Evidence can be scientific research, but also statistical data, citizens' voices, and evaluation evidence. Policy includes legislation, but also oversight, resource allocation, regulations, and strategies. All of these are of the utmost importance to design an arms control and disarmament policy followed by effective action and positive outcomes for people and for strengthening confidence in compliance with international obligations. To ensure that the use of evidence is embedded in a business-as-usual routine, several components need to be in place. First, good quality, well-designed, and robust research evidence. Transparency and easy access to the data. A rationalized agenda, shifting from emotion-based to evidence-informed decisions for action. For these steps to materialize, researchers and policymakers need to cooperate and make the most out of what they can provide. Examples can include data on illicit arms trafficking to reach the SDG 16 targets, multi-stakeholder approaches to biological risk, work on the verification of nuclear disarmament, and research on potential new chemical weapons, etc. Our experts will now address how this requirement for evidence is relevant to various arms control and disarmament frameworks regarding both weapons of mass destruction, biological, nuclear, and chemical, as well as conventional weapons. Join me in our studio with them. Marc Finot is the head of arms proliferation at the GCSP. He will provide an overview on arms control and disarmament.
For weapons of mass destruction, let's talk first about nuclear weapons. There are the three main multilateral instruments are the Non-Proliferation Treaty, adopted in 1968 and entered into force in 1970, which recognizes 5 nuclear weapon states, China, France, Russia, the UK, and the US, which agreed not to transfer nuclear weapons, but also agreed to eliminate their weapons eventually. And the non-nuclear weapon states agree not to acquire nuclear weapons in exchange for this nuclear disarmament, but also cooperation in peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And there is an agency monitoring compliance with these commitments by the non-nuclear weapon states, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. Then there is the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, adopted in 1996, but still not in force because it lacks ratification by a number of nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states. But it has an organization, the CTBTO, also based in Vienna, which monitors compliance with the treaty. And finally, there is a most recent instrument, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, adopted in 2017, but which should enter into force soon after 50 ratifications. In addition, there are a number of nuclear weapon-free zones throughout the world, in the Antarctic, Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, South Pacific, and Central Asia. For biological and chemical weapons, there used to be the Geneva Protocol of 1925, which banned the use of these weapons in war only. But then there was the 1972 Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention that prohibited those weapons altogether, and the Chemical Weapons Convention in 1993 that also prohibited chemical weapons. and that has a verification regime monitored by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, based in The Hague. Now, if we talk about conventional weapons, that means all the rest, there are a number of instruments as well. And there was a regional approach in Europe after the Cold War, the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty that led to massive disarmament, and also the series of documents on confidence and security building measures within the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. But these instruments are now challenged by tensions in Europe. At the global level, there are also instruments such as the 2001 UN Programme of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons. There is the Firearms Protocol, there is the International Tracing Instrument, and more recently the Arms Trade Treaty that regulates trade in conventional armaments. To this you can add the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons or Inhumane Weapons, with 5 additional protocols, the Anti-Personal Landmine Ban Treaty, the Cluster Munitions Convention, and also the Hague Code of Conduct against ballistic missile proliferation. Now, for WMD, there are a number of export control regimes or non-proliferation regimes, such as the Nuclear Supplies Group or the Australia Group. And for conventional weapons, there is the Wassenaar Arrangement and the Missile Technology Control Regime.
Laurence Marcel is Program Officer at Interparliamentary Union. She will discuss the role of parliaments in arms control and disarmament.
Well, parliaments have the responsibility to legislate at national level, to approve the ratification of international treaties, to hold governments accountable, and to stimulate public debate and raising awareness. This is valid for all situations, including for arms control and disarmament treaties. And in order to perform these roles the best way, and parliaments have to base themselves on facts and evidence. This is crucial. And this is also a matter of transparency and accountability for them. So at the beginning of a process, parliamentarians will have to gather evidence so that it makes sure that treaties are really important for the people and that they will positively affect their life, that they can help development and sustainable security. Because this is what people want, and the MPs, the parliamentarians, they are representing the people. So they are shaping the life these people want and the future they want. Through this evidence, they'll be able to advocate at parliament level, just to broaden, the importance of the project, of the treaty in parliament, and also go to government and request that a suitable legislation is submitted to parliament. Then comes the moment of lawmaking, and again, evidence is crucial there because it will help getting a sense of the impact of the legislation parliaments will have to pass, and so the impact on the people, the impact also on the society as itself, and that will trigger anyway some amendments to the legislation in the review. And finally, we have the important role of oversight. And when overseeing, again, parliaments will need evidence and facts just to base themselves on and make sure that they are able to hold the government accountable, that they can get information either from citizen reports or expert reports or data or any kind of report that would help them ask the right question to relevant officials and ministers and make them take the necessary actions.
Matthias Novak is a researcher at Small Arms Survey. He will provide an overview on small arms and light weapons.
Actually, the main challenges remain the same whether you're in a conflict-affected setting or in a non-conflict settings that just witness high levels of criminality and armed violence. It is important to understand the scale and scope of the problem in all of these settings. So for example, how many small arms and light weapons are circulating across the globe? What type of weapons are actually in the hands of criminals, armed actors, terrorist organizations, or armed groups? How do these weapons enter the illicit sphere, or how do these groups access these types of weapons? And of course, what type of impacts do firearms circulating across the globe have on people's lives and securities? These are some of the main issues we look into at the Small Arms Survey. We know that there are about 1 billion small arms and light weapons in the hands of people across the globe. Actually, 9 out of 10 of these weapons are in the hands of civilians. We also know that firearms are responsible for about 37% or 38% of violent deaths across the globe. We know that there's around 600,000 violent deaths each year across the globe, and 233,000 are caused by small arms and light weapons each year. We do know that there's very important regional and national variation, however. So violence is unequally distributed across the globe, and it depends very much where you live, whether in an urban or rural setting, the regions where you live, and also your sex or your age are a high predictor of how much violence you might encounter in your life. For example, nowadays we understand that Latin America and the Caribbean region suffer some or witness some of the highest levels of violence across the globe, in some cases higher than any country at war can witness. One of the core elements of data that we need to understand and need to address is size of the market, of the illicit market of small arms and light weapons. So how many weapons are being transferred each year? Because weapons, for their most part, start their life cycle in the illicit sphere. A legal producer fabricates them and hands them over through a illicit transfer or legal transfer, an authorized transfer, to an authorized end user. However, at some point of the life cycle of these weapons might become illicit and being used to illicit ends. In 2016, the Small Arms Survey estimates the global markets to be $6.5 billion, which is quite a high figure. It has increased 13% in comparison to our last global study. And interestingly, but not surprisingly, ammunition is the largest bulk of this market. We do know that weapons have a rather long life cycle and can survive decades. Ammunition is clearly the one that is mostly needed in the market. Then, of course, understanding the quantities and the characteristics of the weapons that enter the illicit sphere and are being used by armed actors, criminals, armed groups, terrorist organizations, etc. across the world is a key element of data. For now, our research has shown that the way that weapons enter the illicit sphere are mainly grouped in the following categories. We know that there is illicit trafficking, so weapons that are already in the illicit sphere that end up in the hands of illicit users. We know that there's a lot of ant trafficking going on, so this image of container loads of weapons being shipped to a country at war does hold in certain cases, but we have seen also that the vast majority of illicit transaction or illicit flows across the world take place in ant trade format, small quantities being transported by a small number of actors. Diversion does occur during authorized international transfers, meaning that weapons can either be diverted from the legally authorized transaction between country A and country B, but in some cases also false information of the end user is provided, or we also know that after the transfer, of course, it is immediately being retransferred to an unauthorized end user. We also know that illicit production of small arms takes place. We call that either craft production or artisanal production. This can be crude and rudimentary in small, not very modern, let's say, workshops. Some of these craft production, however, are very, very high level and sophisticated production of weapons that look like a manufactured weapon by an official factory. And then the recirculation of small arms, of illicit small arms, is quite an important issue. Given provided this long life cycle of the weapons, we do see that a lot of these weapons can be used in one conflict. When this conflict ends, they will be captured by interested actors and being retransferred to another theater of war or another place where there's serious instability or insecurity, and the weapon continues its illicit life cycle or its illicit life. Therefore, it's very important to understand this particular bit of the problem and making sure that when a conflict ends and the peace deal is being negotiated, that the disarmament aspect is really well studied and well dealt with. The Small Arms Survey looks to generate policy-relevant data on these aspects in different ways and applying different methods. For example, we have conducted a study in the Central African Republic to understand the illicit proliferation of small arms and light weapons, but within the civilian population. So this was not a mapping of the weapons of the armed groups, but proliferation of weapons within the civilian population. In this case, we apply key informant interviews, focus group discussions in the field with the communities that we were interested in consulting. We inspect also weapons that are being seized by different armed forces, be it the United Nations peacekeeping operation or be it national security and defense forces. With these different methods, we can aim at understanding what's going on, what is in the hands of the civilian population, how sophisticated or how modern are these weapons. We can also approach a little bit or gain an understanding of where the weapon might be sourced from. Interestingly, we found that the weapons are being sourced in a multitude of sources and a multitude of countries within or outside the region in general. But for a particular case of 12-gauge shotgun ammunition being used mostly in weapons at use of the anti-Balaka group, most of these were sourced within the neighboring Congolese manufacture d'armes et de cartouches. And being brought over again, and trafficking small loads being brought to the country by pangas or by foot by individuals. Other contexts in which we have applied these type of methods were, for example, border regions between Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire and Mali, where we looked at the mechanics of illicit arms trafficking within this region. And again, we found that arms trafficking makes the bulk of the illicit transactions within that sub-region in particular. And trafficking sounds small scale. Indeed, it is a few actors transporting a limited number of weapons or ammunition. But however, we do know that there are vast amount of these actors transporting constantly small amount of weapons across the border. So this type of illicit flow is still quite important. Another method that we also have applied to understand what is proliferating, what is circulating, how the issue could be addressed, how do populations suffer from this topic, is household surveys. Household surveys are an interesting tool because they allow us to generate statistically representative data at the national level based on general population perceptions or experiences with small arms or armed violence. This type of data can be used then also to design policy or being used as a baseline assessment to monitor and evaluate programs and projects against at the national level. Now, what is key in understanding this problematic and the challenges that it represents is that it's a complex issue. It is often hidden and very context specific. So our stake on this is to generate policy relevant data, but based on a multitude of research methods, combining and comparing the different research results that we gain to try to generate the most accurate as possible, or at least the most context specific possible data and research products that then can be used by the different actors interested in this data. As an example, I can cite the Central African Republic, where we did this mapping of arms proliferating among civilians, where this was based on a request from the national authorities in collaboration, of course, with the United Nations mission to create a baseline that will then directly inform the national small arms and light weapons strategic plan, and the national action plan that would address this issue. So this was an interesting take where such research is being taken up directly by the policymakers at the national level and being used to try to address the issue with context-specific and, of course, realistic measures and adapted to the problem that they were going through. But that's a little bit the way we try to inform policy and generate data that is relevant.
Honorable Chenegi is a Member of Parliament in Tanzania. He will discuss parliamentary work in arms control and disarmament affairs.
As a Member of Parliament first in Tanzania, and also I'm a member of the Small Arms and Light Weapons, with our head office in Stockholm, Sweden. It's a global network, it's a parliamentary forum where we all call upon parliamentarians globally to put the initiative together in order to make sure that we soldier and combat the issue of illicit flow of small arms and light weapons and the misuse of these small arms and light weapons and the catastrophic effect to the people in the global. We have different actors which we collaborate. First, as a parliamentarians, what we do put in place some effective restrictions which makes proper use guidance to the use and management of these small arms and light weapons. This is what we've been trying to do. And as a global network, we do put our effort together because parliamentarians can ask questions in the parliaments, can assist in doing legislations, and at the same time can also collaborate with other actors in the place, including the army forces, the other people who matters in the region. So basically, we are doing this one as a matter of fact that as a global network, we do also invite and welcome all other stakeholders into the governments and other instruments to make sure that this effort is being done jointly. And that's what I've been trying to do. As a global network, I'm just referring to that one. We have the regional bodies in each and every region, continent. We have regional bodies. We have, like in Africa, we have the African Union. We have the African Parliament. And also in other parts of the world, like Latin America, in Asia, in America, and Europe as well. The issue is that we want to see that this illicit flow of arms and misuse of these arms has got a very, very bad effect in the life of the human being. But also we have one of the competition because it is a business on the other side. It is a business. People are making business because of these arms as well and the firearms as well. So this makes them also difficult how to make this kind of a very strange war against the business and the humanitarians. So it's really a challenge to all of us. And we call upon all the international communities, international bodies to make sure that we take a joint effort in fighting against this illicit flow of arms and firearms in the regions. And in Africa, for instance, particularly in Tanzania, we border about 8 countries. These 8 countries, our borders are a bit more porous. So there's a lot of flow. You can see that like the place like Congo, DRC Congo, has not been stable for very many years. We have our neighbors in Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, and other countries as well around us. So you could feel that if the peace has not been controlled jointly, it's a joint effort, then it is difficult to control the issue of small arms and light weapons in our region.
Marc Finot is head of arms proliferation at the GCSP. He will provide an overview on data on arms control and disarmament verification.
In the first category, one may include the reporting obligations that are included in some of the instruments about implementation of commitments. For instance, in the UN Programme of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons, states are supposed to report regularly on what they do to implement their commitments. Now, in practice, they do it every 2 years, which is good enough. Some do it less, some don't even report anything, which is worrying. In the Arms Trade Treaty, there are legal obligations. First, to report once at the initial report on measures taken to implement the treaty, and then every year, annual report on exports and imports. Now, it was revealed by the Secretariat of the Arms Trade Treaty at the last Conference of States Parties that 24% of states parties still haven't sent their initial report, while the treaty has been in force already for 6 years. And out of those that sent their reports, the annual reports, only 47% have sent them in time. So, and then there's a declining trend, and there's also an increasing trend of the number of reports that are kept away from the public, that are kept confidential. So it's a worrying trend, for the sake of transparency, which doesn't allow parliaments or civil society to exercise their oversight. In the other category, in terms of data verification of arms control and disarmament agreements, of course, when this is mandated to international organizations, those organizations require to collect data either from the states parties, the member states, or from other sources, including their own investigations or on-site inspection. This is the case for the IAEA, which monitors nuclear safeguards, or the OPCW for chemical weapons, or the CTBTO for nuclear testing. For instance, there was the case when the IAEA, because it lacked this information, this data, was not able to detect the Iraqi secret nuclear weapons program. And this is based on this experience that a new instrument was developed called the Additional Protocol, allowing the agency to inspect even undeclared activities or facilities. So if you take the case of biological weapons, there is no organization, there are actually no verification regime for the convention. So if a state was a victim of attack by biological weapons, the only solution left would be to require the Secretary General of the United Nations to conduct an investigation, fact-finding mission. Of course, and for this, there is a roster of experts that could assist the Secretary General. If you take the bilateral treaty between the United States and Russia, the New START treaty, it includes an extensive exchange of data and on-site inspection. The treaty has been in force for 10 years now, and over this period, over 20,000 exchanges of data and inspections have taken place. And the question now is whether this treaty will be extended or replaced with another one. And if it's not, then there is a major loss of mutual information and mutual confidence that the treaty is complied with. So in all these cases, the main challenge is transparency vis-à-vis the public, of course, but also restricted with relevant states, accuracy of data, timely transmission, and processing in case of suspicion of non-compliance with the treaties.
And Séverine Fabre is a data expert at Small Arms Survey. She will provide an overview on Sustainable Development Goal 16, targets and indicators.
Illicit arms flows and their impacts are multifaceted, and therefore they call for multi-level efforts. And so when you want to better understand and combat illicit arms flows, you need to collect, analyze, and share data. And so this will then enable authorities to better allocate resources and protect their population and territory more effectively. So the indicators guiding the data are really crucial to support policy making, and especially evidence-based policy making. And they can also help develop strategies or targeted policies. The SDGs support these efforts at a global level. And so the related target related to illicit arms flows, so for example 16.4, like you said, or there's also 16.1 with the reduction of violent death. They are part of that global framework, but in a way you need also to have national indicators so that are adapted to national context. And so SDGs is more on the global level and it's more aimed at being universal, and so they need to be adapted to national context. And this was known since the inception of the 2030 agenda, since in the resolution that established the Sustainable Development Goals, there was already the encouragement to have national adapted indicators. And so in this respect, the Small Arms Survey, in consultation with interested countries and the African Union Commission, has developed national indicators, so adapted to national context. So those one can inform global indicators, but also they can help monitor and evaluate various small arms related interventions that are national. And so the indicators support key issues of small arms control, from illicit arms flows to the prevention and reduction of violent death related to the misuse of small arms, to the implementation and monitoring of small arms control intervention, as I said. And so here you can see the examples of the national indicators that were developed. So it goes from the impact of the misuse of firearms. So you have, for example, firearm-related killings per 100,000 populations. You have indicators related to regional or international framework and the performance related to that. So, for example, whether there are any POA national reports that were made. You have also a more technical aspect, which is linked, for example, to the existence of standard operating procedures related to PSSM, so physical security and stockpile management. And you have also more cross-cutting issues, which is related to gender. And this is about, for example, whether the different indicators are sex disaggregated, the one that can be, or also the women participation in addressing small arms control issues, so informal bodies addressing those issues. And a concrete example of the use of those national indicators is, for example, with Niger, in the National Action Plan 2019-2022 of Niger. Those indicators were incorporated, so in the formulation of this strategy, but as well as in the implementation and for monitoring and evaluation purposes. Another important key findings from this project is that many different stakeholders that could be relevant to small arms control and data are often not in contact with each other on those issues. For example, we saw that the institution mainly worked independently and were not aware of the complementary skills, practices, and data that they have. When we talk about those institutions, those are security and defense forces, National Statistical Office, and also the civil society and relevant ministries, of course, which include parliamentarians as well. At this point, it is difficult to determine whether the target will be achieved. But what can be already said is that progress is being made towards this goal. And so in that area, the progress that are being made is often through knowledge sharing and also research. And this spur the evidence-based policy making as we would like to. So for instance, also the Small Arms Survey has a series of databases on violent death with the GVD, Global Violent Database, on unplanned explosion at munition site that also help policymakers to have better knowledge of those issues. And there are also the 2020 global studies on firearms trafficking and the global homicide study by UNODC that are also step closer to bridging the gap.
Honorable Chegni is a member of parliament in Tanzania, and he will discuss good practices in parliament.
We are having a lot of challenges. I'm saying that the major challenge is that the most vulnerable people in this are the women and children. Because whenever there is this domestic violences, whenever there is illicit flow of arms, there's no proper control, the most affected are the women and children. And that's the big populace in any other continent. This is one of the challenges. But secondly, the challenge is about that we are challenged with the human resources and financial resources, because we need to put this joint effort together to get with a combination of human beings or human resources and the financial resources to make things happen. And most of the areas which have been affected and the countries which have been affected, you could find that even the budget which has been set aside to keep this peace in these particular areas is very, very minimal. So you could see that we need an integrated effort between the international communities, the most affected people, and the needy people and the well-wishers to make sure that they support the effort by the parliamentarians and other stakeholders in this particular issue. But again, we have some evidences, we are seeing it, most of the governments are not quite aware to fight this menace. And that's the problem of the governments. And this is because there's a competition. Sometimes the big shots, I mean, the international community, who are doing the business, they also corrupt some of the governments not to institute a stringent fight against the issue of illicit flow of small arms and light weapons. And as a result, you can find a lot of refugees, a lot of homeless people, domestic violences, and those kind of issues are being increased from time to time. But in my country, in Tanzania, this is not the case. Thus, I can give the evidence. Our current regime and President John Pombe Magufuli, things have been very, very good because himself has taken an initiative to fight against it. And that is a showcase where the president of the country takes the lead and from other, different from other presidents or other heads of states in this continent. And again, we have been instituting issues like tracing, marking, and destruction. We have a lot of destruction in Tanzania of so many illicit flow of arms and properly handled arms in long hands of the people. So if you're caught, we put illustration, somebody should own firearms or any other related weapons depending on the license. You must have a license to own it. And this license has to be reviewed every year. And you have to pay a fee for every year, annual fee, to make sure you maintain it. And you report how you have used it. If you have firearms, how many you have in stock, how many have you spent for, and what for. You have to give a reason for that. This has really been very effective in our country and has really checked in the issue of domestic violence, the issue of misuse of illicit flow of arms in our country. But at the same time, we have put very punitive measures. If somebody is caught possessing an illegal weapon, he will face a very, very strong punishment, including going to jail for so many years. So these are the punitive measures we have taken, and our research in Tanzania has been very, very effective to make sure that we give control of this illicit flow of arms and for firearms and unwanted weapons in our country. But again, I'm appealing to the global world that this fight is not just alone for a few countries, it's a global issue.
As our experts have clearly stated, fact-based evidence is an absolute requirement for policymakers, parliamentarians, and society in making informed policy decisions or overseeing them in the interest of national, regional, global, and human security. It is not an easy task to resist the influence of manipulated or falsified information, especially in a globalized world, where new technologies offers so much coverage and impact. While state security may require some degree of confidentiality, this needs to be balanced with the human right of the citizens and their representatives to be duly informed in order to exercise their democratic responsibilities. This demonstrates the need for a multi-stakeholder approach to security, and particularly arms control and disarmament, because of the potential impact of misguided decisions on people, whether in conflict zones or not. Just like for other major threats such as climate change or pandemics, it is the duties of the government to listen to the scientists and experts and take action to prevent or mitigate the risks that have been identified. This is why governments and international organizations should form partnerships with the scientific community along with academia, industry, and civil society organizations, to unite efforts and combat destabilizing arms proliferation, and eliminate, as a priority, weapons of mass destruction that threaten the survival of humanity and of this planet.